everyone. Thanks again for tuning into yet another podcast session with Netscribes. Today is going to be a very interesting discussion. The topic we are going to speak about is quite interesting yet very complex, which is speech and voice recognition systems in automotive industry. We have with us a very special guest, Todd Mozer. So he's the CEO of Sensory Technologies. He's a prominent leader and a pioneer in uh, voice and speech recognition chips. So welcome, Todd. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great. So to start off, maybe if you can give us a quick thumbnail of what Sensory is, what are its solutions, and your journey with it.
Sure. Well, I started Sensory more than 25 years ago as a technology development and licensing company. We started with speech recognition and natural language understanding kind of things, and we've added biometrics, including face and voice over the years. We've done speech synthesis, NLU, sound identification, and a variety of what's now called deep learning technologies. What's interesting is that we started with the vision of enabling products to communicate with people the ways that we communicate with each other. And we decided to do it on device with neural nets, which today we call it on the edge, and we call it deep learning. But a lot of the technologies that are popular today, we were using many, many years ago, just with less data. So you could think of it as shallow learning. And we built a real expertise in edge-based technologies with low power. And the experience has been pretty successful at licensing. We've shipped in over 3 billion products, and our licensees are the biggest names in consumer electronics and in technology. Even companies that have huge AI teams have licensed our tech because of our traditional specialty in being small. So Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Samsung and all these giants have licensed technology from us. And what's interesting is today we've now come out with not just the tiny low-end technologies, but we have cloud-based solutions and everything in between.
Wow, that's fascinating. So moving one step ahead, speaking a bit more about the automotive industry and what kind of work Sensory is doing for this space. What kind of offerings do you have, and where do you fit in this yet conventional but emerging ecosystem of automotive tech?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we've been very successful with low power, high accuracy on-device technologies. And on-device has been very important for the automotive industry for a long time, because when you're driving around, you don't always have an internet connection. So I would say the area that we're probably most famous for is wake words. So speaking either a single word or a series of small on-device phrases to a device. And we've done a lot of that type of work in the automotive environment. We've also done some biometrics work. And we've discussed a lot of interesting things like in-car voice assistance and sound identification and computer vision to watch the driver's face for drowsiness. These kind of technologies are what we've been in discussions and have been licensing in the automotive industry. The in-car assistants handle all sorts of different voice-driven functions like navigation, like infotainment, all the car controls, heating and seat adjustments. These kind of things make a lot of sense for voice control. And sound identification can be useful for identifying sirens. We've had interest in even kind of health sort of things for the Ubers and the taxis, so that if people are coughing in the car, it can be identified. So a lot of different things fit into the automotive environment.
Excellent. So yeah, no doubt, especially with when we're talking about future of mobility, there's so many use cases coming in within the auto space. So now automotive is largely perceived as a very conventional mechanical sort of industry where there's huge amount of disruption coming in from the non-auto companies. the big giants, the tech companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft. So, uh, what do you think is the role of these companies? And I've heard you mention that these big tech giants rely on you for certain technologies in the speech. So, how does this span out in the automotive context?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a really good complex question, and it's an evolving kind of answer as well.
Mhm.
As you know, Google and Amazon recently are doing pretty major cutbacks in their area of voice
Yeah.
assistance. I think Google and Amazon were reported to be losing like $10 billion a
Mhm.
year, so they're trying to cut those losses on areas that they invested heavily, and they really got into too much of a competition with each other and over invested. It's easy to see that in retrospect. And I'd say you can now see that that Apple played their cards right by not getting into that kind of marketing battle over the assistants. So more recently, Google had Android Auto for the automotive industry,
Yeah.
and they dropped that and replaced it with the Google Assistant driving mode, and that was dropped last month. So
Mm.
you know, Android and the Apple iOS ecosystem are always going to play a role in the automotive environment. What that role is evolving. It seems like the automotive manufacturers want to have their own in-house technologies now for an assistant that runs on device and handles all the car kind of controls, whether it's navigation or adjusting seats or these sort of things. And then they can turn to the third-party assistance for doing things like, what's the weather in Stockholm, or tell me my
Mm.
stock quote, or order me a pizza. Those kind of functions, they don't really need to have run by their assistants, and it's okay to turn to Google for those sort of things. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of interesting stuff going on. You mentioned that it was these big giants disrupting the automotive industry. I would add to that, the rise of these independent car companies, Elon Musk
Yeah.
and Tesla is probably the prime example, has probably done as much or more to revolutionize the auto industry and their use of technologies as some of these giants. The giants, they're very powerful, but the automotive companies kind of are playing a mixed role where they're licensing from a lot of companies, they're
Mm.
experimenting with a lot of things, they're using Android and they're using Google, and they're using different technologies, but they're also scared that these giants could come out with cars someday.
Yeah.
Apple was purported to be developing a car, and there's been conversations about even Google and Amazon
Mm.
doing similar kinds of things. So it's a very mixed and interesting environment.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's it's so interesting to see a startup to scale this huge. I mean, before Tesla, the last startup making cars was 65 years back. So yeah, I mean, it was a knee-jerk movement for the entire auto industry to see a startup coming in and booming and questioning the very thought process of the industry. So uh, now, like you mentioned, that the conventional OEMs do want to control the in-vehicle experience. They want their systems to interact with the consumers, be more in the center of the whole consumer experience. So, what do you think is how does the wake words uh, span out in the automotive OEMs? So, since they are very keen to bring in the smartphone-like experience, and what kind of solutions does Sensory have in this space?
Sure. So wake words are super important in every experience, whether automotive or otherwise, because it's the technology that's always on. And when something's always on and always listening, it has the opportunity to fail with false accepts at any moment or false rejects. You don't want it accidentally going off. So this component of the technology stack is extremely important. And a lot of manufacturers underestimate the importance of this and how much of an effect it has on user experience. Sensory's done a whole lot of work in this area, And we not only have wake words that can be predefined with the automotive manufacturer's name, but we have tools that they can create their own wake words and experiment with them, free tools that we let people use. We can add speaker verification to a wake word. We can let the end user that drives a car create their own wake word. So maybe I want my car to wake up when I say, hey, Todd Mozer's car. I could train it on that. So we have a whole host of different wake word based technologies. And we can not only do it super tiny on device, like with 50 kilobytes of memory, but we can do revalidations in the car or in the cloud to make it feel more accurate. And we can do it ultra low power. So we have really the most complete suite of wake word technologies in the world, and we can do it in any language and et cetera, et cetera. So the good news for automotive vendors is if they have a bad wake word, it's a really easy component to switch out of their system. So if they wanted to change to sensory, it's not tied into everything else, and it's a separate component. And it's a really interesting thing. I'll give a quick anecdote. In fact, I was at CES a few years ago, and I went by the Mercedes booth, and they had a Hey Mercedes wake word. And of course, I was interested, and it wasn't sensory, and I was interested in trying it out. And what they told me is, oh, we're not showing it on the show floor because it's too noisy in here. That's a really good sign that they need to switch wake words, because cars are noisy. And if you can't demonstrate it, then it probably doesn't work well enough. So in fact, you've asked a lot of good questions. Let's show a quick video of the technologies that Sensory has and some of what the in-car experience with a voice assistant might look like.
Voice Genie, turn on my headlights and roll down the front passenger window.
Your low beam are turned on. Opening front passenger window.
Voice Genie, navigate me to 2812 Ironwood Circle, Erie, Colorado.
Starting navigation to 812 Ironwood Circle, Erie, Colorado.
Voice Genie, what's my battery level and what's my range?
The battery level is at 96%. The remaining range is 192 miles.
Voice Genie, send a message to Todd Mozer.
Sending message to Todd Mozer. What's your message?
Hey Todd, I'll be there in 15 minutes but need to charge my battery.
Your message is, hey Todd, I'll be there in 15 minutes but need to charge my battery. Do you want me to send it?
Yes.
Message sent.
Voice Genie, navigate me to the nearest charging station.
Starting navigation to the nearest charging station.
Voice Genie, turn on cruise control and set my cruising speed to 70.
Cruise control activated. Cruising speed has been set to 70 miles per hour.
Voice Genie, increase cruising speed by 5 miles per hour.
Cruising speed has been set to 75 miles per hour.
Voice Genie, set the temperature to 72 degrees.
Your vehicle has been set to 72 degrees Fahrenheit.
Voice Genie, play Hotel California by the Eagles.
The song titled Hotel California by the Eagles cannot be played, but a different song can be played instead. Playing jazz music from internet radio.
Wow, that's so cool. I mean, integrating vehicle functions with voice commands is definitely a welcome step for consumers. So, looks amazing. Uh, Now, just stepping on the other spectrum, I remember you mentioning about your work in biometrics. This again is something which I, as an automotive analyst, have been hearing about it for like 5 to 6 years now. But somewhere we haven't seen it kick off. We don't see it in many cars as such, or many OEMs showing a keen interest in it. What seems to be the direction which biometric technology within the automotive space is going towards?
Yeah, so I'll both agree with you and disagree with you. I would say
Mhm.
it hasn't shown up as much as we would like, but there has been a lot of interest in it, and it's probably been just behind the scenes. So
Mhm.
at different CES shows, we've done demos with Chrysler using, I think they used our face biometrics, and we did demos with Mitsubishi Automotive with our voice biometrics. So we've seen a lot of interest in this, and a lot of the use case is making things more convenient for their customers. And the idea is that if I get into my car, it would be great. And right now, I share my car with my whole family because I don't drive into work anymore. So we have less cars and we're sharing them more. And it would be nice if when I sit down, all my favorite settings just automatically get set. I don't have to adjust my seat. I don't have to, change the radio or destinations around. And by looking at my face, it can actually do things like that. And as social media and these kind of things become more important for passengers, you can actually identify who's sitting where and cater to their needs. So there's a lot of interest in it within the car and even outside of the car. Remember the old commercials of somebody walking up to a car with a bag of groceries and they wiggle their foot under the back trunk and the trunk pops
Yes.
open. Well, you don't really need to wiggle your foot anymore with voice
Mm.
biometrics.
Yes.
You can walk up and just say open the door and it can pop up. So we've seen a lot of interest in these kind of use cases.
Interesting. So, of late, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot of interest coming in, especially for the new technologies. And one way that we've seen companies understand or appreciate this new technology and they start forming a sort of consortium or a group of people coming together who are technically competitors, but they want to come on a table, discuss out certain technologies, which we have seen in various autonomous platforms and EV platforms, and also the various electronics. So, for technologies such as speech recognition or biometrics, do you see this as a good step to take it to the next level?
Yeah, good question. And there's a lot of different types of consortiums that we could talk about. So there's standards consortiums, and the interesting thing about a standard is there's often competing standards so that they're not really standards. But then there's things like open source, which is really a very interesting area in the area of AI, because a lot of very high quality AI open source systems have gotten very popular and are really advancing the state of the art. And if you look at some of these giants like Google and Meta, they're open sourcing a lot of great technologies that they develop. Just in the last few weeks, ChatGPT has gotten
Yes.
a lot of press, and there's been a lot of really amazingly impressive demos. And what Sensory has found is we always experiment with sort of the latest open source technologies. A lot of times they're, in fact, all the time, they're really big in terms of practical deployment. It's very difficult to deploy them, for example, in a car. So it has to be a cloud environment. And part of what we do is taking these state-of-the-art technologies and make them a lot smaller so that they can run on device and in an automotive environment where you're just a lot safer with them. So there's a lot of things going on in the open source space. We recently joined the SOFI consortium that was started by ARM, and it's an interesting approach, of course, to use ARM processors and other components. But the idea is that you can take cloud-based components and move them on device in a sort of standard way. So if you have cloud containers, you can run them on a SOFI environment. And the demo I showed you actually runs on SOFI platforms as well. So it's a nice approach that could cause a real standard to evolve in automotive that makes it easier to incorporate AI technologies and gives the automotive manufacturers a little more control of their environment. The more standards that emerge in hardware and software, the easier it is to take out components and put other components in so that they can really control their architecture and not be reliant on a sole vendor, which may or may not work out for them.
Very interesting. So you mentioned this is quite interesting where uh, there is a lot of sharing happening for buildings that standard or just kickstarting this technology and bringing it to a level where OEMs uh, recognize this and start building it within their vehicles. So one such area is when you think of scalability. The first thing that comes in mind in automotive is standardize it into a platform. So which we have seen quite often, and you have mentioned the open source platforms. So now people are using shared hardware, shared software, they're revamping their architecture. So in this whole idea, what does it mean for sensory, the open source platforms? And second, what does it mean to the end consumer? Will all of this technology, in essence, make the experience better, or will it just complicate things?
Yeah, really good question. Probably the answer is both. A lot depends on how the automotive manufacturers incorporate things. If you look at what's happened with autonomous driving, they've invested huge amounts to bring that in-house. If you look at what's happened with speech recognition, they've invested large amounts, not as big, but they haven't yet brought it in-house. And I think there's going to be a tendency for the automotive companies to really build bigger and stronger in-house AI teams so that they can take advantage of open source and other technologies. And I think the standards that are evolving will help companies like Sensory because we can help the automotive manufacturers bring these things in-house and have the state-of-the-art technologies. Because our expertise is moving big things onto device and deploying efficiently on device, we can do a lot of help to the automotive manufacturers. And we have a business model where we're pretty flexible. We're a small company. And so we've been in discussions now about source code licensing so that automotive companies can actually take our technology stack, we'll train them on it, they can take our tools, and then they can take over and not be dependent on us. It's an interesting state of the speech technology and the AI technology industry, where you've got a mix of these giant companies with their technology stacks that the automotive guys think maybe they're going to be competitors, maybe they're going to burn us by suddenly dropping us. They can't be dependent on them. Then on the other hand, there's a bunch of fledgling companies like Sensory that our longevity and our stability is less secure, and they don't want to rely on these smaller companies. They want to bring it in-house. So that's where Sensory is really good at helping these companies achieve that.
Interesting. So very well articulated where there is this too difficult choice or the choice in front of the OEM, whether to go with big giants and whether to prefer agility over the big fat companies, suppliers. So, and you've also mentioned about the importance of on-device computing. So now it has become more predominant when we are talking about an autonomous future, where there is a lot of computing happening within the car, and there are certain section of this of the industry who are visualizing that eventually we would have the computing on a cloud, and there would not be any computing required for a vehicle. So in this regard, what is your opinion or what is your perspective on how the autonomous technology will evolve, and what would it mean for sensory in terms of in-vehicle experience?
Yeah, so I think at least in the short term, everything has to happen on device. You can't risk going external for autonomous driving or speech recognition. When you're in a car, you don't want to be distracted. You don't, when I was talking about wake words, they can have false accepts or false rejects. That's a distraction. And it's kind of a bother, and it hurts the user experience if it fails. But if you're doing something even more important, like relying on your car to, spot signs or people or, make kind of visual decisions, you can't have mistakes happen or else crashes will happen. And for safety reasons, at least in the near future, everything's going to need to move on device. And our cars are basically already giant computers, and that's going to stay the same. In a lot of industries, we've seen movements from the device to the cloud to the device and back and forth over time. If you think about kind of the telephone answering systems, initially you had tiny little tape cassettes built into your phone answering machine, probably before you were born. And then it moved into these giant cloud solutions, or they didn't call them clouds back then. It was a server, client server kind of architecture that would store your messages. And then with the advent of digital technology, the messaging came back to your home devices. And nowadays we don't even have that because people barely use the home phone systems. Everybody's got a cell phone system. So we've seen sort of this evolving on-device cloud, and the same is going to happen with automotive. But for things to move to the cloud again, it's got to be super secure that the cloud can be reached. And I think we're not going to see that level of security for a number of years. So the cars will stay giant computers and be able to carry out all the AI functions there and fast. Probably an interesting question is how that architecture will play out. We've talked to a lot of different manufacturers that want us to stay super tiny, even though the car has a lot of resources. And so, in a home and in a car and in lots of environments, there's a question of how you multiplex the different computing platforms. Do you have one centralized platform that does a lot of things in parallel, or do you have separate things controlling each? And I think cost factors will play a big role, cost and quality factors in their decisions on how to play that role.
Agreed. So this brings me to this question where now that we are changing the architectures, we are moving into more, like you mentioned, more centralized domain sort of an architecture where you club things and make one master computer to do multiple functions. And so in your perspective, what is the way forward for the auto industry and for the speech technology, and with that extension for sensory?
Yeah, I think that the approach is to have a big platform that can do a lot of different things. I think they're going to experience cost savings with approaches like Sophie that are quite large, but enable a lot of different functions to be carried out on the same hardware. In doing that, it'll give vendors like Sensory more leeway to offer better technologies. Right now, if we get told by an automotive company that they want a 50 kilobyte wake word that doesn't draw much power, well, because of the size of that model, it's not going to be as good as a 1 megabyte wake word. And so we're always asking, can we revalidate on device to make it perform better? And the more they move to architectures that provide more resources to everyone, the better. And it's interesting what we're seeing in terms of the edge-based computing. There's a lot of specialized inference engines on the edge that are emerging, and not just standalone engines, but ARM controllers and these kind of things that add specialized hardware functions for doing inference. And it's allowing us to do the computing that we want much, much easier. And the issues that we're seeing is lack of memory and the forced quantization for deep learning. We would prefer to use our own quantization approaches because that's what we've trained on. But the more we move into some of these predefined inference engines, the more we have to use their quantization schemes. So a lot is going on there, and it's an interesting dynamic. But I do think the centralized architecture will appear with specialized inference and inference capabilities in that architecture.
Great. So my final question is now, given what do you as a leader in this space? So what would you want to express or communicate to our readership. It could be OEMs, it could be the suppliers of technology. Anything that you want to tell them about, or about what is in store, what do you expect, what is your prediction for, since we're starting the new year now, what is your prediction for 2023 and beyond?
Well, so my first thought was me as a consumer, because we're all most of us are consumers of automotive devices. I would love to have an autonomous RV that can take my wife and I around the country. I'm 62 years old, and one of these years I'm going to retire, and it would be really cool to have an autonomous RV that I could say, take me to Yosemite, and it takes me there. My guess is that we're a good 10 or 15 years away from that. But I think that'll be a really neat future when that happens. And if Sensory can help in moving towards that future with automating the voice commands so that they always work, we would be happy to help everyone.
Amazing. It's been a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure the listeners will do as well. It was lovely speaking to you. Thank you for your
very nice
time.
speaking with you as well. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.